कहाँ ऐसी खुशबू चमन के गुलों में, कहाँ जो नबी के पसीने में मौजूद है। हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर, हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर, उनकी तस्वीर सीने में मौजूद है। जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया, जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया, वो मोहम्मद मदीने में मौजूद है।
Reflections is sponsored by Can Law Solicitors. We specialise in personal injury claims. Call us on 0141 378 0514. Can Law. If anyone can, we can.
Radio Ramadan 87.7 Sound for the soul.
Paratha Box on Leicester Street, where bold flavours meet authentic tradition. Discover freshly made authentic parathas crafted to order in the heart of Glasgow. This Ramadan, head to Paratha Box on Leicester Street and enjoy our special offer. An aloo paratha and a chai for just £6.99. Available for dine-in and takeaway only. Real flavours, real experience. Visit Paratha Box on Leicester Street. T's and C's apply.
Scotland, let's celebrate excellence. Nominations are now open for the Scottish Muslim Awards 2026, and we're back for our third phenomenal year. Do you know a trailblazer in business? A champion in charity, education or community service? You can shine a light on their impact. Join us on Sunday 27th September at the stunning Hilton Glasgow for an unforgettable night of inspiration. Head to scottishmuslimawards.org and submit your nominations today. The Scottish Muslim Awards 2026, celebrating excellence, inspiring the future.
M. Suleiman Group, proudly serving independent retailers for over 50 years. Scotland's trusted #1 cash and carry, offering household essentials, hardware and electricals, DIY supplies, toys, greeting cards, balloons and event products, all under one roof. Thank you to our loyal customers and staff for being part of our journey. Visit M. Suleiman Group on Stromness Street, Glasgow.
Strawberry Gardens, बेहतरीन, खूबसूरत, सफाई बेमिसाल, आंखों को भाए, दिल में समा जाए.
Strawberry Gardens, 4th Street, Polkshields, Glasgow.
आज मेरी पेशानी पे किस्मत ने चूमा है, माहे मुक़द्दस में.
Do you know there are 170,000 new cases of cancer each year in Pakistan? Do you know that Imran Khan Cancer Appeal provides free cancer treatment to 75% of its patients? Do you know that the third specialist Shaukat Hanum Cancer Hospital is being built in Karachi? We need your support more than ever now. Please donate today by calling 01274 424 444 or donate online at ikca.org.uk.
Yadgar, the home of true traditional Pakistani food in Glasgow, original and still the best. Yadgar would like to wish everyone success in this blessed month of Ramadan. Yadgar Kebab House, 148 Calder Street, Glasgow, or call us on 0141 424 3722. Yadgare Yadgar.
Big Day Events, Scotland's biggest Asian caterers and event planners, specialists in full wedding packages with access to numerous venues from countryside retreats to 5-star hotels. From 100 to 1,000 guests, we can cater for your event without compromising in quality or service. Ensuring a successful and carefree event for you, call Big Day Events on 07 855 861 802 or visit us on bigdayservices.com.
Scotland, let's celebrate excellence. Nominations are now open for the Scottish Muslim Awards 2026, and we're back for our third phenomenal year. Do you know a trailblazer in business? A champion in charity, education, or community service? You can shine a light on their impact. Join us on Sunday, 27th September at the stunning Hilton Glasgow for an unforgettable night of inspiration. Head to scottishmuslimawards.org and submit your nominations today. The Scottish Muslim Awards 2026, celebrating excellence, inspiring the future.
Values of the Org, the new media enterprise hub.
Inclusive, we will provide an open, fair and accessible space for volunteers to develop.
Shining the light, Radio Ramadan, 87.7 FM.
हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर उनकी तस्वीर सीने में मौजूद है जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया वो
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Radio Ramadan 87.7 FM program reflections. Rather late start today with your host Zubair Akram and my guest Sheikh Rizwan Muhammad. Possibly the last or could be the second last reflections of this year, inshallah. But I think during the course of this conversation we will let you know if it's going to be one or two episodes. This is going to be the last or the second last, inshallah. So Surah Quraysh and Surah Al-Fil is what we've been reflecting upon for last almost 28 sessions, 27 sessions. Surah Al-Fil, 105th Surah of the Quran, and Surah Quraysh, 106th Surah of the Quran, both being twins or a pair of surahs, which one can't be understood without the other. A backdrop of history, going on to the explanation of what that meant, the historical event meant for Quraysh and for Prophet Sallallahu himself, alayhi salatu wasalam, and his companions and followers thereafter. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Sheikh, I would like to, inshallah, conclude these two surahs today in a very kind of short, punchy summary of both. So there isn't any ad break in between. We're going to go from here till iftar today. And I would say that after this session, the way we finish this session, inshallah, is I have a very strong feeling these two surahs are naats. These are also praising Prophet ﷺ in a way which is quite indirect, but it is setting a stage for the honor of Prophet ﷺ, which gets concluded in Surah Al Qawsar. Mm-hmm. So if you agree that we'll do one more session on Surah Al Qawsar, the final session, just an intro, and perhaps we will cover Surah Al Qawsar next Ramadan in detail.
Well, that's a commitment. I can't commit to that
yet. Okay.
You can't pull me into that in that way. Yeah.
Okay. Khair, inshallah. So let's start with Surah Fil and Surah Quraysh, inshallah, today.
Yeah. So what do you want to do? Is today's show the final show, or is it another show after this?
No, it's going to be another show after this one.
Oh, there is going to be another show. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think yesterday, was it the day before, there was a quick attempt to finish off Surah Quraysh And we did the last verse, which summarizes a lot of the themes that we talked about before, which was essentially, once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had reminded them of the privilege that they have and the safeguarding that they have and the safety that they have and the protection that they have, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says that you should then worship the Lord of this house. The Lord meaning the sustainer, nourisher, protector. So Rabb has all those meanings. And then the next verse says, الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ. It's an explanation of what's contained within the Rabb. So if Allah had stopped at فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ, it would be sufficient, because for an intelligent person, if they understand what Rabb is, which is a Lord, sustainer, protector, you would understand that sustainer means sustaining through food, and therefore protecting from hunger and famine and poverty and so on and so forth. And also Rabb would be the protector as well in that sense. وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ. You would understand that from the word Rabb. Okay, so you wouldn't need, essentially, الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوءٍ, the one that, the Lord that protected them or safeguarded them from poverty and hunger and protected them from fear. You wouldn't need that. But it's part of eloquent speech that in a situation where you need to be clear and you need to provide information, that you do that. And especially if it's in a situation of blessings. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that, it was essentially to reiterate what was understood, but to then re-emphasize the privilege that they've been given, so that they were, Allah it's himself subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that gave them food to protect them from hunger, to protect them from starvation. Jur' is actually, a type of starvation. And also protected them from fear itself. So there's two elements there that were interlinked. And it goes back to the idea of, when we said that God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that we haven't created humans and the jinn and the humans except to worship. That worship, we said, is knowledge, and knowledge is the realization of God and His purpose. But straight after that, in the verses that say that we've not created jinn and humans to worship, Allah says, "Ma uridu minhum min rizqin, wa ma uridu an yut'imun." I do not want. Allah says, I do not want from them any rizq. In other words, God has ordered people to worship Him. God doesn't need that we reciprocate that through feeding or sacrificing towards God. And this is interesting in the context of this verse, which says that it's God that saves you from starvation and gives you, essentially protection. It's not the other way around. A lot of people think that, it's a reciprocal, transactional connection that we have with God, which is that we do this, God does that. If we fulfill our part of the bargain, then it's almost like a transaction that we can walk away from it, having our goods and then going away. And after that, in the verse, Allah says, Inna Allah wa Razzaq. It's Allah that is the one that is the provider. Al-Razzaq is the one that gives permission. Dhu Quwwatil Mateen. And the one that possesses power, which is unbound. So power meaning power to protect from fear. So it's very interesting, when the verses that talk about the purpose of human creation, which is to serve God and to worship God and ultimately to know God, tie that in with the fact that God deserves that because He's the provider and the one that gives you security and safety. And here in these verses as well, Surah Al Quraysh, it's the same thing. So it's very interesting end to the chapter. And with that, it concludes the cycle of those two. As I said before, many of the companions would recite Surah Al-Fil and always couple it with Surah Quraysh straight away without even interspacing it with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, because they understood it to be a complete unit of meaning, which was protection. Essentially, if you were to give, it's interesting if you were to say, well, what is the unity between them that makes them one whole? What is the theme? What is the title? What is the headline? Imagine the headline for these two chapters. The elephant and the shark, I said. Quraysh essentially is a word which is a diminutive of the use of Qarash, which is Quraysh, which is the shark. I mean, it's well known. I mean, when we talked about this in one of the episodes why they were given that name. It was because one of the forefathers of the Prophet ﷺ wrestled a shark and brought him to land, and he was given this name because he was the one that wrestled it, and he was from, and then the tribe that he's from became known as the Quraysh. And as the shark is like the most vicious, I mean, it's considered to have one of the strongest bite forces in amongst all creation, either shark or the I think the shark's probably got one of the strongest bite forces in creation, land or sea. It was the Quraysh were similar to that. The Quraysh were given this preeminence. So this preeminence comes from the shared meaning of Fil and Quraysh, which is to do with this sense of security and protection. So this preservation, I mean, you would have to say preservation, actually, the preservation of the Quraysh. Both chapters actually talk about the preservation of the Quraysh, which then brings to mind, why would God seek to preserve the Quraysh? What was special about them? That's the question that comes to mind. What is it that God has placed within the Quraysh that means that God would, first of all, protect them from a marauding army that was about to attack and destroy their city? And the other thing is, what is it about the future of Quraysh that we need to think about? In terms of the upcoming events that will take place in its near history. And that's why these two chapters are considered to be important. It's protection, but then the question is why? Why protect? Why Quraysh? Why not other tribes and nations, Qaba'il that were around, other other, communities that were there? What's the purpose of it? And it comes very clearly back to this, sense of purpose which is outside the chapters, which is the Prophet ﷺ not mentioned, but an observer of both the chapters. So if you think about it, why is the instance of the Fil important? It's important because it's a prelude to the coming of the Prophet ﷺ. The safety of the city and the preservation of the city is a prelude to the coming of the Prophet ﷺ, because within a couple of weeks he's born and held up by Abdul Muttalib in front of the Kaaba. So it's a very, very clear connection to the protection. And then the other thing, which is the safety and security and affluence of the Quraysh, is also related to this special place that they will have in terms of the privilege that they have. And all of it comes back to this idea of فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ, and therefore let them show obedience to God, the Lord of this house.
Just a question that's come to my mind. Affluence of Quraysh. But the reading of Sirah normally, as it's presented, is one of poverty. Prophet ﷺ was kind of struggling with finances most of the time. He was leading a simple life. He didn't leave any inheritance. So Qurayshi affluence and the poverty almost that we are we deal with in Sirah, the reading of Sirah. How does that combine? How does it connect?
Yeah, so the poverty that we hear about in terms of Sirah is related to an accidental poverty. It's a poverty that comes out during the time of the Prophet ﷺ's initial call to people, which then leads to boycotts. It leads to the expulsion of the Muslim community and the sidelining of the community and the economic embargo on the community. So that's a separate thing. That's to do with the test that God puts the Prophet through by saying something that's unpopular. So it's like a person who has a business, but then say they boycott a specific brand or a specific good, and it impacts them financially. But if they hadn't, they would be affluent. It's a very similar situation to the major Muslim individuals like Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was affluent and a trader, and he was affected by the embracing of Islam. So the simple act of embracing Islam meant that he was in economic disadvantage to the point of complete oblivion, complete destruction of his business. And that was many companions at the time. And also even people who were not rich at the time, it went to the point not just of poverty, but of survival. If you think of a person that was enslaved by the Quraysh and then they became Muslim, it was another level over their state of slavehood, that they now were now assigning and associating with the Prophet ﷺ, which meant that they were even more difficult times. And so that is contrasted with the general economic affluence and advantageous position of the Quraysh amongst the trade routes, which, if you compared it to other tribal communities, it was much more beneficial. It was much more positive for them. If you compare it to the seasonal herding of other Arab tribes, and the kind of subservience they had to the Romans or the Persians, where they were constantly in survival mode. The Quraysh weren't in that survival mode because they almost had a type of monopoly over trade routes, and they had a type of franchise that nobody else had, which was the ability to leverage their access to the Kaaba, which then they made into a pilgrimage route, remember? So that in and of itself then creates two aspects, economic and also privilege related to religious sight. And it's from that you get this sense of, if you would say, stability, if you would say privilege, affluence of sorts. So that's contrasted with the life of the Prophet ﷺ in terms of the tribulations or trials that he gets. And the reason he gets those is specifically because of the fact that he calls out the Quraysh on things and doesn't negotiate on these things. And obviously that creates the embargo, the year 2 years almost of embargo and boycott against the Prophet ﷺ. And so
the historic fact remains that Quraysh, they were one of the most affluent in the area. They were regional economic power.
I would say privileged relatively to others, because they have a monopoly and franchise that the other ones didn't have. So those two gave them a relative advantage. It doesn't mean that they were enriched beyond poverty. It just means, in comparison, like if you look at the Byzantine or Persian empires, the people at the top were living affluently, but the majority of people weren't. But here, as a tribal unit, the privilege of access to a trade route or trade routes, I mean, there's 4 trade routes they had access to, the others didn't. And the fact that they had access to the Kaaba as a site of pilgrimage meant that they, it's almost like, if you look nowadays about strategic standing, if you do a strategic geopolitical analysis of any country, you look at its location and you look at its ability to export to certain markets and to be able to import. So, for example, if a country's got good trade relations with its neighbors, is able to export, able to import, and strategically is important, then the country is going to be somewhere you invest in. So imagine if we were now, you and myself had, say, an amount of money, and we were looking back in history at the time, and we were looking to invest in traders, then at the very core of that would pop up this trade route. We would say, look, these people, they're able to go north, they're able to go south, they're able to go to Abyssinia, and they're able to, basically have free access to markets. And look, they're also strategically placed where there's relative safety, and they have this centrality through this pilgrimage. That's a good place to invest in. Do you understand? So in other words, if you were looking around the world, you've got the Persians and the Byzantines constantly fighting, you would think, well, we don't know who's going to win. If one of them wins, our money's lost. So it'd be like a safe investment, because everything strategically would, basically point towards the fact you would invest in that place. And it's in that context the Prophet comes, and that's why, one of the dalail of Nabuwa, one of the proofs of the Prophet's prophethood, is the Prophet didn't capitulate to that state of affairs. He didn't say, okay, I'll try and ensure that you keep the privilege and you keep the centrality of access to the pilgrimage sites. He didn't. He said he came with Tawheed, and he says this is non-negotiable. If the Prophet, famous instances, the Prophet said that if you place the sun on my right hand and the moon on my left, that I leave this message, I would never leave it. So, I mean, even that narration, sometimes I think about it, does it mean the sun and the moon as sources of wealth, to give him the right and the left, all wealth, basically? Or sometimes you could, I always understood it as a type of torture, a type of tribulation, where you torture somebody through putting immense weight on both sides of their existence. But either way, it shows that despite the stability and the privilege that they had, the Prophet didn't water down the issue of Tawheed at all, or the equality of human beings, or the equal access to God's felicity and hope and mercy for every single person, male, female, black, white, didn't make any difference.
So the normal understanding always has been that sun and the moon meant wealth.
Mhm.
Meaning, if I had abundance to the level that I have sun on my right and moon on my left, why did you say torture?
No, I mean, like it's like the weight of the sun and the moon. It's like intense weight of two things, like two celestial bodies that the Prophet had to be forced to carry. It's like if it's like in Nasanulqi alayka qawlan thaqila, the Quran says we will place upon you a weighty message. Something that would push you down and pull you down and almost be too much to bear. And it's almost as if this is the weight of these two large celestial bodies would be something that would almost torture him. So you could take it as a way of saying the riches of it, but it doesn't say that in the hadith. It just says the sun and the moon. So you can take that as it is. But the point being, he didn't move from the central pitch, which was Tawheed, which was unity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The privilege you have is because of the Rabb. The privilege you have is because الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ. It's because of the Rabb, the Lord, the Sustainer, that protected you from poverty and hunger and gave you safety from fear. That's Tawheed.
Okay, I'll come back to that. If these two things are Tawheed. But before we go on to that, in this context, both hunger and fear, so they, in a very close past, they were experiencing both hunger and fear, and then they were given respite from that.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah, so that's the whole thing. The ilaf is the point they were given respite. So when they managed to strike these commercial free passages, it was a watershed because it stopped the prior situation of constant flux and inaccessibility of them to markets and wealth. That was all part and parcel of their norm, tribal warfare and so you have to then think at a certain point they didn't have it, they were given it. And then you have to think, what is it? Where does it come to? Where does it come from? And it all points back to the origin of the whole story of the Kaaba, the whole origin of Makkah al-Mukarramah, and the fact that the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam said, Rabbi ij'al hadha al-balad amina, make this land a land of security, and make it a place that my progeny do not worship idols in. So it goes back to the secret of why they were able to do that wasn't in their acumen and their negotiating skills. It was the fact that God was preparing for something else, which was the realization of the coming of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in doing that, the most unexpected place became the most protected place, the most special place in preparation for the coming of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam.
We did say we won't have an ad break, but I'm told there is one. We'll go for an ad break just now, and inshallah we'll be right back after this. And after the break, we'll be onto this topic of how at'amahum min ju' wa amanahum min khawf equates to Tawheed. And a break, and inshallah we'll come back to this.
हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर
Claims. Call us on 0141 378 0514. Can Law. If anyone can, we can.
Radio Ramadan, 87.7 FM, the alternative wave.
The Quran reminds us every soul shall taste death. At Hajj Memorial Services, we understand the pain of losing a loved one and are here to guide you with respect and care. From selecting and designing a meaningful memorial stone to expert installation, we support you every step of the way. We also promise to be any genuine quotation, giving you peace of mind during a difficult time. Visit us at Unit 5A 593 Lowmore Street, Glasgow, G50TT.
Or call us on 07552 244 435.
Looking for expert accounting support in Glasgow? Choose Shields Associates. We specialise in accounting, VAT, taxation and HMRC inquiry solutions, providing expert reliable support for businesses and individuals. Our experienced team makes managing your finances simple and stress-free. We're centrally located in the business centre of Albert Drive, Glasgow. Shields Associates, accountants you can trust.
Angie, bro, I'm starving. Where are we eating yet at?
Aye, mate, that spot that starts with C.
Well, yeah, just say it.
Chilo's Burgers, proper Scottish brand. None of them England franchises try to take over.
Alright, say less. What they serving?
Beef burgers, crispy fried chicken, grilled chicken, Philly cheesesteak loaded fries.
Oft, the Godzilla burger just changed my life, yeah.
Told you, happiness in every bite, bro.
Chilo's Burgers. 12 stores across Scotland with 10 more opening soon. Search Chilo's on Google and get yours today.
In the blessed month of Ramadan, Agosh UK Al Khidmat Foundation, in collaboration with Radio Ramadan Glasgow, is raising funds to provide iftar meals in Gaza. As families do their iftar under the weight of loss and hunger, a warm meal becomes more than food. It becomes survival. For just £4, you can provide a hot iftar meal to someone who has lost almost everything. Your small act of kindness can mean dignity, relief, and a moment of peace at sunset. This Ramadan, stand with Gaza. Donate now at radioramadan.scot.
इफ्तार की तैयारी और वही भागदौड़। जल्दी जल्दी समोसे तलना, खजूरें सजाना और फल काटना। मगरिब से पहले शदीद भूख और टेबल सेट करने की वो अफरा तफरी। पहली खजूर खुशियों का शोर और हाथों हाथ बढ़ती इफ्तार की रौनक। रमजान को खास बनाते हैं यही लम्हे और रेमिटली के जरिए घर पैसे भेजकर मैं इन रौनकों को यूं ही बरकरार रखती हूँ। रमजान मुबारक, हर ट्रांसफर अपनों को और करीब लाए। रेमिटली यूके लिमिटेड इज ऑथराइज्ड एंड रेगुलेटेड बाय द FCA.
Planning an event? Choose Blanc Events, award-winning planners you can trust. From intimate gatherings to grand celebrations, they bring your vision to life with style and precision. Call 07 547 763 942 or follow at blancevents_GLA for inspiration.
Values of the Ark, the new media enterprise hub.
Partnership. We will increase connections and establish networks to strengthen collaborative work.
Welcome back to Reflections with Zubair and Sheikh Rizwan. Sheikh, just before the break, you said, Alladhi at'amahum min ju' wa amanahum min khawf is Tawheed. How?
No, it's not is Tawheed, it points towards Tawheed. So Tawheed is obviously the unity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah, but how does this point towards Tawheed?
Because if you think about it, the chapter in specifically Surah Al Quraysh, it talks about the fact that God gave them security, safety, prosperity, privilege, And then it then tells them to then, at that point, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. It says, at that point, you need to come to know and worship the Lord of this house. So lordship, which is a type of status, you cannot have a number, House of Lords, but they're not all lords. They're just given a title. But in reality, there's a sovereign above the lords, which is the king. And even the king in the British system is not absolute privilege and power. Above that is a legal system. The legal system has a hierarchy, normal courts, district courts, you've got the High Court, and then you've got Supreme Court. Supreme Court is ruled over by a number of people, but the judgment of the Supreme Court is actually the real Lord. It's the real sovereign. So if you think of sovereignty, it's the one that can make the ultimate final decision. And in that sense, there can only be one true Lord. And if there's only one true Lord, there's only one creator, one sustainer, one Allah. So that's Tawheed. Tawheed comes from this sense that the Rabb cannot be a number. It cannot be a multiplicity. It has to be one Lord that oversees all of creation, all of guidance, all of poverty, all of health, all of wealth, everything that's provided for us, the good, the bad, everything comes from a specific source, either to give us blessings or to test us. And so when that happens, Allah says, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Let them therefore worship the Lord of this house, الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ, that gave them, protection from hunger and starvation, and protected them from fear, and given this safety from fear. So that can only come from one source. And so all of that is pointing to the Quraysh towards the fact that instead of these idols that they're worshipping and all the elements that they give meaning to, and part of that is even, the traveling up and down, the provision is on account of traveling and gaining wealth and profit from that. Even that is not from their actions, it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's all related to Tawheed. The privileges you have, the wealth that you're able to make, it essentially comes from one Razzaq, one provider, one sustainer. So all these things point towards the fact that there's one entity that is worthy of our worship. And then that's going to be the basis upon which the Prophet ﷺ is going to be sent. He's going to be sent to just underline and to re-emphasize something that they all know, which is everything that comes, whether good or bad, whether beneficial or harmful, they have to understand it from the perspective of the fact it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why I meant when I say all these indications in these two chapters point towards Tawheed. Even Surah Quraysh, Surah Fil points towards the unity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it's Rabb that protects. Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. Did you not, O Muhammad, see what your Lord dealt with the companions of the war elephant? What your Lord is not a number or multiplicity of lords, it's one Lord. So these both, if you look at the connecting part of these two chapters, there's a couple of things, but the most important one is a sense of protection that emanates from the fact that there's a Rabb in both, that there is a protector, sustainer, Lord over both of these situations, both in protecting from attack, but also providing blessings, providing affluence, providing safety and security. All of those, once we start to do that, then we, in our own lives, we start to then focus in on how that affects us, because the aim of Islam, essentially, if it's most core level of teaching, is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and create a scenario and situation within which you have both. You have you honor pathways towards protecting against hunger and starvation, and you honor and protect pathways towards creating safety, security within a society. So these are the kind of major headlines that any Muslim community, group of people, nation should attempt to adhere to, which is once you have safety, you can have everything else, if you don't have safety, you can have no worship of God. Like you can't have, in fiqh books they talk about, one of the conditions of Hajj is that you're able to have safe passage. If you don't have safe passage, there's no Hajj. And this is why a long period of time, Andalusians couldn't do Hajj because of the war against the Spaniards, and it made it difficult for them to travel. And so if you look at the Muslim world, the privilege of having somewhere quiet and safe and secure and affluent, or at least sustainable, where they can pray, is one of the most basic primal human instincts that we need to try and strive towards. So even though we're saying these are signs of God's protection of Mecca and God's privilege of the Quraysh, what it actually does, if you think about it, is it tells you the privilege that the Quraysh had, but it also tells you of what you should in your own societies and communities try and uphold and work towards, which is general fairness in the way that people are treated, in the way that provisions are provided to people, in not crippling people, but also having that safety and security in the community as well.
Sheikh, you said aim of the Quran, aim of Islam is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I remember years ago we did Surah Insan, inna khalaqna al-insana min nutfatin amshajin nabat, especially this word amshajin nabatalihi, faja'alnahu samiyan basira, and then inna hadaynahu sabila imma shakiran wa imma kafura. So here the aim seems to be slightly different. It's not just, it's worship, but then as if the test is mandatory. You are created to be tested. I remember you saying that you're not given these faculties so that you will be tested. You will be tested, and hence you're given these faculties.
Yeah, so then, when it says, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ, let them therefore worship the Lord of this house, then that's a test, because it's commanding and ordering you, but it doesn't mean you're going to do it. So in a sense, when Allah says the instance of the companions of the elephant, and God gives them the sense of privilege that they have through ilaf and the contracts that they have and the privilege they have through this monopoly, it's at that point that God's then testing them, because the reality is, look, they didn't worship after this. So that was a test. Like, they're given ears to hear, they're given sight to see, they're given memory to remember. So the historical instance of the Amil Fil, they're given all these things to test them. Nabtalihi. So there's your answer. Is they're given, the Quran is being recited to them as a test. They're hearing it. They're being told, Alam tara kayfa, have you not seen how? They're being told to use their intellect. In other words, they're asked to engage all their senses, the 5 senses that they have, in then giving a reason why they shouldn't worship God. But what you'll find is, because of the immediate benefits of not doing it, which is disrupting the ilaf, which they think that might be taken over by the Prophet ﷺ, or the fact that the privilege of being custodians of the sacred precinct with the idols in it will then disrupt their economic centrality. Those immediate things stop them making the long-term decision, but also making the clear decision in their mind now about the truth of what the Prophet came with. Do you understand? So the senses that they have then become a barrier towards them coming up with a clear conclusion as to what they should be doing. And so, Surah Al-Insan is essentially showing you the reasons why people don't, and also giving you the reasons why this world essentially is a test. Because even if you give somebody a clear message and a clear blueprint of what they need to do, very few people do it, because very few people can take themselves out of the here and now of, oh, that will mean that I'll miss this, or I won't be able to do that. And so you might have a person that wants to become Muslim, but they say, oh, but it means that I'll have to give up X, Y, and Z. So it's the immediate downsides that they see, but not the long-term upside and the truth of it. The truth will be pushed back in their mind, and they will continue on. And that's the nature of, a lot of people. Very few people, when they see truth, they acknowledge it and accept it. Most people, they look at the privilege and they look at the pros and cons, and they try and hedge, they call hedge the bets. They try and hedge the bets as long as they can. And then this is why Allah says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ عَلَى حَرْفٍ. And amongst people in Surah Al Hajj, Allah says that there are amongst people, there are those that worship God ala harf, on the edge, right? On sitting, literally means sitting on the fence. So if they're given ease, they become happy, and if they're given difficulty, they turn their backs. In other words, they're waiting to see, hedging the bet to see what's in their benefit. And the Quraysh were like that. They knew the truth of it. They knew the Prophet ﷺ. They knew his character, his teaching was clear and concise and accepted. But there was this idea of arrogance, but all this sense of lost privilege that they would miss. But the Prophet ﷺ, remember, when he came, he didn't seek to take the privilege away from them. He just sought them to just disassociate themselves with the worship of idols that they were engaged in, and then the ramifications of that, which is this oppression that they then brought upon people in their community.
So, Sheikh, these two surahs, Surah Al-Fil, Surah Al-Quraysh, as you said, they are sometimes read without even a Bismillah in between, right? And then it ends in just two things. The epic is against hunger, who fed them against hunger and security. So it's money and security. It's risk and security. So, the headline right at the end is these two things. And these are the most important things we take, that we all work for, or is the core relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is achieved through these two.
No, neither. Look, these two things are what we should strive towards. In other words, we should strive to, meaning these are indications of God's blessing. So if you're told about God's blessings, you should try and strive towards them. Peace, security, safety, lack of war, lack of conflict. It's a basic primer. It's a basic primer for human existence. It's a basic foundation for that. And people being not fearful of where their provision comes from, where their food comes from, is a basic need of human beings, without which you can't think about anything higher than that, like the purpose of life. There's a famous quote by an English writer who says that I'm a warrior so that my son can become a merchant, so that his son can become a poet. So I'm fighting, which is the basic thing of survival, so that my son becomes a merchant, which is the way of gaining provision and financial security, so that my son becomes a poet. In other words, is able to reflect upon higher things, the purpose of life and joy and happiness. That's the same thing here, because it's almost like this chapter of the Quran, where you've got the most basic need. Until you get it, you cannot get to the next need, and until that, you cannot free your mind up to think about the purpose of life. Okay, but the survival also gives you that indication, like the thinking about the survival for survival, the struggle to survive, the struggle to eat, drink. You still have to think of where that comes from and where the source of that is. So, the last verse of the chapter of Quraysh is not the purpose of the chapter. It's actually, even in grammar, it's they call it Silat al-Mawsul, which is basically a sentence which has no function in grammar. It has no function in i'rab. If you know what i'rab is, it's basically the sentence is there just to emphasize something that came before it. So everything that needs to be said has been said. Everything substantial in the chapter has been said, which is the privilege of the Quraysh.
So this is
means that they should.
This is punctuation. This is punctuated. This is like made it. So
yeah, it's like an expansion of what's understood, because you have privilege as Quraysh, therefore you better start worshipping God. That's it. That's the end of the message, and it just gives you extra information. Is in Arabic called itlab in rhetoric, which is to expand slightly, to give you a fuller picture of exactly what was meant before in what you just said before, just in case you missed it. So, but in doing that, the benefit of that is it gives you an insight into the core requirements for human society, which we then take away. Meaning, as an accidental which is tangential point, which is safety and safety from poverty and safety from fear, become then for us a blueprint for what we should strive towards in our actions as communities and nations.
So the blueprint is to strive for lack of poverty or eradication of poverty and eradication of poverty,
of fear,
and eradication of fear. These are the two ultimate goals.
Yeah, and I would say if somebody's intelligent listening, they would realize that any movement, any ideologies that seek to create perpetual conflict are anti-Quranic. So I don't know if anybody will understand what I just said there, but I'll just say it for myself then. Any kind of movement, any kind of sect, any kind of ideology that seeks to create perpetual conflict is anti-Quranic, which means anti-prophetic. I mean, I've just said anti-Quranic because it's assumed you'll know that means also anti-prophetic. And the seerah of the Prophet also points the same thing out. The Prophet never wanted conflict, never engaged in conflict unless it was the absolute end. But an ideology that seeks as its basic premise to exist, that is conflict and struggle, is, I think, anti-prophetic, because it strips humans from the ability to reflect upon the purpose.
Yeah.
Conflict in and of itself is not something that's required.
I remember listening to a South African, South African politician / a Muslim activist in London, maybe 20 years ago. A room full of scholars, and he said, "Look, we are not seeking jihad all the time. We're not seeking fight all the time. We're seeking peace all the time. So we seek peace. We don't seek jihad. We don't seek wars. And jihad is not our way. And desiring shahada is not something that you should make a slogan of your movement, if you like, because you are desiring peace. So this is what maybe 70s, 80s, 90s, Pan-Islamism showed this path to many a youth. That if you are in a perpetual
there's many
fight,
people whose notoriety or fame nowadays is going about telling people how they were, how their experience of taking that path and how they survived and why they should be seen as warriors and people worthy of emulation. I always find that so strange that you have people going about telling them about how they were captured and how they were tortured, when the whole pathway of decision making up until that point was complete stupidity. So I mean, I just sit with popcorn and watch that. It's very sad. The Ummah generally and its youth have become enthralled in that kind of narrative, which is, I would say anti-Quranic. I would challenge anybody to argue with me on that case. Ahlan wa sahlan. I've seen people try, but they've not got very far. It is an exception. You cannot build your religion on an exception of warfare and conflict and resistance. It has to be built on the opposite. And if you create the conditions for the opposite long term, the opposite occurs.
Yeah, so it's a very, very subtle kind of move or subtle kind of turning point in your paradigm of worldview. That you don't live for a conflict. You live to achieve peace.
I was I attended a lecture of Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi rahimahullah, and he mentioned the fact that if he was to ask people to lay down their lives for that path and sacrifice themselves, that everybody would put their hands up. But if he was to ask people to put their hands up to live for Islam, istajibu lillahi wa lirrasuli idha da'akum lima yuhyikum, from the Quran, respond to the call of God when he calls you to something that gives you life. He said no one would put their hand up. Like, everybody's willing for this heresy. The heresy is just to think that it's shahada, which is it's the ultimate purpose. But the Quran doesn't give that. It only gives that when there's no option. But we've given ourselves no option. and then we celebrate the fact that Shahada is the way. And I think that's it's a complete misunderstanding of the Quran.
So alladhi at'amahum min ju' wa amanahum min khawf. This is giving your life to these two things. Giving your life commitment, basically. So
life commitment, time, effort. The time and effort it takes to create, at'amahum min ju'in, to realize that in a community is difficult. You have to plan. You have to have 10-year programs and investment and these kind of things. And to protect from fear requires the same, lots of effort, lots of time. People don't want to put the time in. My life experience has been that people will not put the time in for things that take time. They will rather do things that take 5-10 minutes to get it over and done with. Sign of malaise, and I have to hate to say it, but a sign of a lack of trust in Allah's promise, because for me it just shows that there's no connection with Tawheed there at all. There's no connection with Tawheed. There's no connection with the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and how he built society, how he built the people around him through decades of work and interaction and teaching and patience. There's no sense of that at all. People don't want that, especially in this day and age. They think that the Khilafah is like one of the choices on your Eat Me, or what are these apps that you have? You order a meal. It's like one of those options where they press it and it should be delivered to your house. This is why Al-Mutanabbi says.
Sorry, yeah, carry on.
No,
sorry?
I want to see what Mutanabbi says then.
No, I want to hear that.
لا تحسبن المجد تمرة أنت آكلها. Do not consider valor and success as a date that you eat, sweet date that you eat. لن تنال المجد حتى تلقي الصابرة. You will never achieve to sweetness until you chew on cactus, the cactus plant. In other words, difficulty, struggle, tribulations, and patience.
Subhanallah. There have been many highlights of these 24, 25 sessions, 26 sessions, I think. I would say the headlight, the biggest one has been meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through his names. And final few moments of this session, for some probably it will be the final session and there will be another one. Sit back and watch your life unfold and later connect the dots. So because at every dot you meet him, either through his Rahim, his Qabid, his Basit, his Raziq, his Muntaqim, his Mutakabbir, and all the other names. Just a bit on that as a summary. It's fascinating, and I think people who haven't heard it before, how do you meet God through his attributes?
I mean, I don't know where this came into the chapter, but essentially when you have the chapter of Al-Fil, you have this protection of God. He is Al-Hafiz, the one that protects. And the Quraysh would have realized that, but for the Abraha and his army, it would have been Al-Qabid Al-Muntaqim, which is the one that constricts and restricts and destroys and demolishes. And, so these are all ways that we come to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We come to know God through his actions and creation, his names and his qualities and attributes. And we miss them. The general thing is, if you have a test in life, that test can be manifest in one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you have a test and you feel constricted and lacking a choice, you're essentially coming into contact with one of the names of Allah, which is Al-Qabid, the one that is constricting your soul to the point that you feel unable to find a solution to it. It's almost like being in prison. You're imprisoned within in a state where you don't see a way out, which is why, they used to call prison the school of Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, because it's a situation where you find no way out. And even in that situation, if you come to terms with that and you look at it as Al-Qabid meeting you, then that's your way out. Otherwise, if you're oblivious of it, Al-Qabid will stay that and you will be constricted in it. And the same thing with, that chapter, the first one we did, Surah Al-Fil, is that the Prophet is told, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. Essentially, what you should see there, O Muhammad, was that he protected. He's the one that was a mani as well, the one that stopped the marauding armies from attacking the Kaaba. And so when the Prophet was told to reflect, he was told to reflect upon one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so even in Quraysh, Surah Quraysh, when we go into that, again, it's pointing towards the fact that Allah is al-mun'im, the one that gives you ni'am, which is ilaf, these contracts and trade agreements that they had, which then they're told to then use to reflect and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with. So worship essentially is at every moment in your life to be aware and open to the fact that when you're faced with a situation, whether it's good or bad, from your perspective, that good and bad is still directly to you from God. And your reaction to it, anger, hopelessness, and pleasure, happiness, all of these are essentially your reaction to what God has given you in terms of qada and qadar, which is why, أن تؤمنوا بالقضاء والقدر خيره وشره من Allah. It's one of the tenets of faith, which is to believe in the decree of God, the good and evil being from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that means that what's written is that every single moment in your life, you will come into contact with these names and you have to interact with them. Everybody will do it in a different way because everybody's situation is different. And so everybody's, book on the Day of Judgment will be completely different, because God will mark their exam based on their conditions and based on their ability, not on this universal idea of universal ability and universal time and universal questions. Everybody's questions will be different. Everybody's capacity is different, but everybody's reward based on that will be completely different. And so it means that, people that judge other people, they really need to know that they're not the people examining. So that's what I always think about when I'm thinking about somebody in a difficult situation and they've done something I think they've gone wrong. I do advise them, but there's a sense that you cannot get into their mind to understand what they've done to make that decision. And so you don't judge, you just teach, you just give irshad, which is to point them in the direction that will, give them help.
So just a final few moments, Sheikh, and meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in constriction is also a meeting. In affluence, there is a meeting. In your health challenges, you're meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah.
In all
every
situation, in every situation in your life. Difficult to say shukr at the time of constriction. Very difficult to say shukr at the time of your challenged health. How do we bring ourselves to say shukr at that time?
Yes, it depends on the person. The person's demeanor is different. I mean, one of our teachers, his son passed away and he was told about it while he was teaching. And he finished the lesson, then he told some of the students to come with him to help bury his son. So that was the gratitude of living, having experienced his son and the blessing of that. And then, that is something very few people can do. That you could look at it as a taking away, but you can also see it as the fact that the child has gone before you into a far better place, which you will then join them in. So it all depends on people's, the farsightedness of people's intuition and their spiritual state. And the more you work on that, the more you're able to expand your horizons. Like if you've never left your home city, you'll never know anything beyond that. And once you travel to another city, you'll know that there's other cities. And once you travel to another country, other cultures, other climates, realize the world is vast. And what we generally do is we restrict our understanding of life and God based upon our own experiences. But it's only when we start to look into the lives of prophets, and especially the Prophet ﷺ, that you see this vast vista and expanse that is unbelievable and unrestricted, where you see the capacity of a human being to live the most perfect life with the most difficult of circumstances, and come from the Battle of Badr and then have to come straight away to the burial of the Prophet. So that it gives you an indication that with inna ma'al usri yusra, indeed with difficulty comes ease, and with difficulty comes ease. Ease and difficulty come in cycles. So when we look at the prophets, that's what we realize, that they give us an insight that we never will have.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Sheikh.
Alaikum salam.
سینے میں موجود ہے. ہم نے آنکھوں سے دیکھا نہیں ہے مگر, ہم نے آنکھوں سے دیکھا نہیں ہے مگر, ان کی تصویر سینے میں موجود ہے, جس نے لا کر کلام الہی دیا, جس نے